We had to get things right so we can go ahead and get this moving. Welcome to Week 5, final thoughts of the Osmo Daily Fantasy Show. Chris Randone, got my man, as always, co-hosting, Sal Vitri. What's going on, man?
Hey, Chris, what's going on? How's your weekend going?
It's going good, man. I'm excited to always do these shows with you, man, because you bring out some numbers, you dig deep into it. You're like the NFL encyclopedia, so got to respect that brain of yours, man. So I'm excited to do this show.
I appreciate that. Yeah, let's get into it. This seems like we were talking before a week where we feel pretty prepared right now, so we'll see how it turns out Sunday.
Yeah, we mentioned before the show, Sal and I, that it's a nice slate because we don't have to worry about certain teams that we like to have shares of. The Chiefs are not in this slate, the Rams, the Seahawks. So it's kind of nice because we always go to those teams. They're playmakers. They usually have high point totals, but they're not around. And I feel like this slate has a few games that are just gross for DFS fantasy purposes. And then there's other games that have a lot of upside. But before we get into it, just, remind you guys, as you know, our beautiful sponsor over at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points by simply signing up through us at osmo.com. You guys know the deal. It's real easy. If you haven't signed up yet, go over to osmo.com, click on the Spotlight Hitters article or any other NFL article on the new NFL landing page. From there, you click on the Yahoo Fantasy Sports link. Use the sign-up code OSMO. That's AWESEMO. Once again, guys, before we get into it, we usually go over injuries real quick, and I just pulled up the most recent injuries. Nothing much has changed. Josh Allen is going to be starting. We got Jalen Ramsey out, who's going to be the game against the Panthers. And then outside of that, really didn't see too much. Jimmy Smith is still out for the Ravens. James Conner will be playing. Saquon Barkley is going to be out, so we don't have to worry about that $4,500 price point on FanDuel. But outside of that, really didn't see too much else. Any injuries or anything that you want to take note of for DFS purposes before we get into ownership?
I think the Jets defense seems to be coming in a little bit injured here. CJ Mosley expected to miss, and Quinnen Williams, who at the beginning of the week seemed like he was trending to be probable. Now it just turned around on Friday, questionable, leaning towards doubtful. So for that matchup, just Jets defense in general seems a little bit weaker now against Philly. Individual matchups there get a little bit better. On offense, I think looking at the game in London, Tyrell Williams is a game-time decision, and J.J. Nelson has been practicing all week. So, I mean, if those guys miss, it's really just Darren Waller out there against a pretty stout Bears defense. But those are the main ones. Tyron Smith expected to be out, Dallas offensive lineman.
Yeah, Tyron Smith, big piece of that offensive line, especially for the running game for Ezekiel Elliott. So if he's out, I don't know if it really changes much, but Dak Prescott, as you guys know, last year got sacked over 50 times. So far this year, only 3 times. So big piece of that line is because of Smith. We're looking to see how that actually pans out. So when we go into ownership, guys, we always break down those who are over 20%. And surprisingly, Sal, current Osmo projections, we only have 4 guys that are projected over 20% right now. It seems like a pretty spread out, even type of field this week, which I kind of like. It makes it a little bit more competitive. There's one guy, 3,500, who's over 20%. We'll get into him shortly. But the number one overall guy right now that is 26.5%, Christian McCaffrey. I mean, obviously, the snaps galore, shares galore. I think the backup running back has seen 4 snaps, not 4 touches, 4 snaps all season. Can you go wrong here at 26.5% with Christian McCaffrey?
Yeah, no, you can't. And like you said, not a lot of guys over 20%. And it's because you have all these stud running backs on the slate pulling from each other. So for the most part, it's really up to you, whatever stats you pull from, whatever you feel comfortable with, whichever one of these top-end running backs you're getting to, it's going to balance each other out ownership-wise. So that shouldn't be too much of an impact. So, yeah, if you want to get the CMC, 37 touches last week, there's no reason that you should be trying to run away from it. It's just preference at that point out of these top 4 or 5 running backs when it comes to the 7,500 or above range.
Yeah, I agree. I think the volume is just too much to pass up. I think the talent is just too much to pass up as well. I mean, we have a guy here that is basically playing every single down, every single snap. And I mean, he is the vocal point of the offense. And I mean, to be quite honest with you, it's hard because his floor is just so high. And I mean, in cash game purposes, I feel like he's 100% must. And also in tournaments, you can't miss out on him because if he goes off and 26% of the field has him, I mean, it's going to be really hard for you to put yourself in a situation where you can end up cashing. So I'm in total agreement with you there. Our next guy, you said you have a lot of numbers on him. I'm excited to see what you have broken down. 3,500 Auden Tate. As we know, he went down. John Ross went down this past week on Monday Night Football against the Steelers. Tate had already been establishing himself the last couple weeks, leading the team in reception yards and really being more involved in the passing game. We saw Damian Willis kind of step up and snaps the first week when Tate wasn't around, but that's changed drastically, and Tate has seemed to really get involved with Dalton. He's 24.6% owned. I really see this as a cash game play for sure. I'm still trying to figure out how much I want to be with the field as far as GBP is concerned, but break down these numbers and help us understand a little bit more about Tate.
Yeah, so I'll mirror some of the things I said on Thursday. He's just a really big body wide receiver, and he's a guy who's not going to burn you in speed. He ran like a 4.6 40, so nothing great there. But when you get into his specifics the last few weeks, so 2 weeks as sort of the wide receiver 3 primarily, was top 25 in routes run, coming in at 24th, running as a wide receiver 3, that is. So now going to be running as a wide receiver 2 with no John Ross. Was actually getting separation the last 2 weeks, something that he wasn't doing in college, something that he hadn't done in the preseason, and really when he's been scouted the last couple of years. But he's been top 15 in separation the last 2 weeks, and he's just a big body receiver. When you look at his matchup this week, it doesn't matter who they put on him. So the way that this defense is going to line up right now for Arizona, Tremaine Brock they have in the slot. He'll get Tyler Boyd, a great matchup for Tyler Boyd. But on the outside, whoever gets Auden Tate, it's just a complete mismatch. You're either going to have Byron Murphy, who's 6 inches smaller than him and 38 pounds lighter, which is probably the likely matchup. Or for some reason, they could put Kevin Peterson on him, who is 47 pounds lighter and 7 inches smaller. So either way, he's just going to bully these guys. He doesn't have to be faster than them. When it comes to the red zone, yes, he's going to be the most viable red zone target ahead of Tyler Eifert on this team. So it's a really good matchup. You touched on it. In cash, he seems like a really good play. In tournament, you have to ask yourself, do I think this guy can get me, 16 or more points to be in a Millie Maker winning lineup closer to 20 points more times than not? Just based on the fact that he's going to have a really good red zone role against the Cardinals defense, that their passing game is going to seem a little bit inflated in defense in terms of looking good because they're just getting run on, because early on teams pass on them and then just get ahead. That's what happened with Seattle last week. But overall, I think Auden Tate definitely really good for cash. And I personally like him. The 25% ownership we have right now on him, I think is fine, and I'm fine going over that. I do think he has upside to see the 16, 18, even more fantasy points, just based on how he's being used in this offense already. And now the matchup, just nobody compared to him in size.
Tyler Boyd through 4 games, 1 red zone target. Auden Tate through 4 games, didn't even play 1 game, 3 red zone targets. Another thing to point out is a lot of people are on Will Fuller, and I've seen a lot of people talking about how many air yards Will Fuller has. Well, Will Fuller has 240 more air yards than Auden Tate, okay? And only 27 yards after the catch. Auden Tate has 280 yards less in air yards than Will Fuller, and he has 28 more yards after the catch. And so what I'm trying to say is that Auden Tate at 3,500, I feel has a lot more upside. He's a huge target, red zone target. With John Ross out, you got to think he gets some of those shares as well. And to be quite honest with you, Dalton, I mean, they seem to have established a relationship the last 2 weeks, averaging about 6 targets a game. At 3,500, 6, 7 targets, he catches a touchdown, catches 3 balls. I mean, not only is he hitting value, but it really sets you up for roster construction elsewhere within your lineup. So really like him on FanDuel. Curious to see the updated ownership from him on FanDuel. Love getting a cheap wide receiver in that area, and he's definitely fits that mold. But, I mean, at 3,500 on DraftKings, it's really hard to pass up. This is a different play, in my opinion, compared to Trey Quinn or Paul Richardson. I mean, at least you have a quarterback that can throw the ball compared to Washington. And you also have someone who is a big target, someone who can come down on a big grab and be that red zone threat. So I agree with you. I think 24%, I'm a little shocked. I thought it would be in the 30s, and I'm okay with it being 24%. So if there's any hesitancy, you just got to figure out how much of shares you want to have of Auden Tate moving forward. Our next guy that's 3rd% highest owned is another big playmaker, another big wideout, 6,600, which I feel is very cheap, in my opinion, on DraftKings. 21.5%, Michael Thomas, going to be at home playing against the Bucs D. How do we feel about Big Mike here at 6,600?
Yeah, I like him. He like you said, he's too cheap. He's probably $1,000 too cheap for this matchup. He's a guy we're used to being priced mid to high 7K range, sometimes an 8K when Drew Brees is in there. But Drew Brees not being in there and Teddy Bridgewater being in there, it doesn't really hurt Michael Thomas's game. He's not a guy who goes deep. And this, in general, this offense doesn't throw the ball deep, even with Drew Brees in there. So Michael Thomas, more times than not going to be running 10-yard routes, which is exactly what Teddy Bridgewater is a specialty at. Sort of a Teddy checkdown nickname there. 10.5 targets per game for Michael Thomas is fine. You're still getting targets. Last week, caught all 9 from Teddy Bridgewater. He has over 42% of the team's air yards this year, which is top 5 on the slate. And the low A-dot routes, they're just going to gel and mesh so well with what Teddy Bridgewater does. So we're factoring all that in. We're factoring in ownership of 21.5% and then the price play and what it allows you to do. I like it in all formats, of course. In cash, it seems really good. In tournaments, it seems really good. The 6K range of wide receiver, as it's been really every week, there's a lot of good plays. This is probably the best one, even factoring in that ownership. I mean, if he's in 1 out of every 5 lineups, it doesn't seem like it's too much. And again, I'll keep reinforcing it. This is a week where it seems like maybe outside of Auden Tate a little bit, but even then the price justifies it, that we finally have a week where chalk is all like good players. Like everything I'm seeing at 15% or above is good players. So you don't have to just fade Michael Thomas because he's popular and a good player, and not even mentioning the matchup of nobody out there can guard this guy.
Yeah, the thing is, I think these last couple of weeks, they've really been trying to get this connection going with Bridgewater and Thomas. And I think what we've seen is, he had 5 receptions against Seattle, then it increased to 9 against Dallas. And so, obviously Bridgewater's got to know he's got to give the ball to him, outside of just giving it to Kamara as well. I see a lot of checkdowns with Kamara, a lot of screen plays so far, playing a safe route. But I mean, you have a big playmaker. Send him down the field. He only has 2 red zone targets this year, which is what I'm a little bit concerned about. And the only thing I hate is Bridgewater. Just, I want to see him be more aggressive. But the price point's great. I mean, the point per dollar there is, you can't really pass that up. I would love for them to go deep. Mike Eckwards, the safety for the Buccaneers, has struggled against deep passes this year. I think there's a QB rating of 142.9 against deep throws going his way. So yeah, I would love to see just more of a passing attack, but it's like you said, it's good chalk. He's a great playmaker. He's going to get targets. He's going to get receptions, which is great for PPR purposes. So I think I like him a little bit more on DraftKings than FanDuel, to be quite honest with you. Our last guy riding out the top 20% is Dalvin Cook, 8,400, going against the Giants in New York, 20.7% projected ownership. This guy's been a stud this year. I think hands down, outside of McCaffrey, I think, to be quite honest with you, top 3 running back in the league. He is just dynamic. His explosive speed, it looks like, is back from like his FSU days. It's just crazy from his injury. So how would you feel here about 20.7%, but at 8,400 price tag on DK?
Yeah, it's completely fine. Like all these top end running backs, none of them broke free. McCaffrey a little bit at 26.5% right now, but the ownership on him is completely fine. Going to be a road favorite against a run defense that is not fantastic and a little bit inflated in terms of how good they've actually been, just from the backs that they faced. You have him right now ranked as the number 1 Pro Football Focus running back, number 1 in DRs. Success rate is really high, and he already has 10 red zone rushing attempts. And that's kind of light because of the way some of the game scripts have gone. Rookie Alexander Madison has gotten some work. So Dalvin Cook's completely fine. And yeah, we have just Cook, Zeke, David Johnson, all these guys, these top end running backs coming in at pretty much mirror ownership. So what it comes down to is just, who do you like more? Does the price come into play a little bit with David Johnson? Because the ownership on all of them is completely fine. More times than not, it'll be okay.
Well, let's talk about that real quick, because Johnson and Elliott are right behind Cook at 19.4 and 19.3% respectively. And we got Johnson being the cheapest of the 3 at the price tag of 7,500. Great matchup. We just saw what Jalen Samuels and James Conner did to this horrible front 4 of the Cardinals, of the Bengals defense. And obviously he feels like a lock, especially at that price point. Their running game is not as good. Their offensive line is not well. And I think that's what we've seen so far in the production from the running game. But in the passing game, he seems to be heavily involved. And that's what's making up for that lack of production on the running game. So how do you feel when comparing these 3 running backs?
Yeah, so David Johnson I have a lot of interest in. I have him right now projected only behind Christian McCaffrey at running back in terms of just overall points. He's playing a very similar role. So obviously in the backfield, not as much, just because this team, Kyler Murray attempting 42.5 attempts per game right now. So he's just much more involved there as a receiver, averaging close to 9 routes per game in the slot. That's only going to go up with no Christian Kirk. And he's tied for Christian McCaffrey in routes run as a running back. not getting any stuff percentage. Nobody's playing 8-man boxes against this team, and he's playing a ton of snaps. So David Johnson, when you factor in the price point of being in the mid-7s, is a really good play. And I thought the ownership would probably be, as it was, I think, earlier in the week, higher on him, but now it's balanced out a little bit more, and McCaffrey's broke free. So I actually like, out of all these guys, David Johnson the most. In most, probably in cash and GPPs and formats, the price just helps a little bit. But again, it's just so close. At the end of the day, he'll probably break free in terms of my own exposures a little bit. But then Zeke, Cook, McCaffrey, they're probably going to all be pretty balanced out in terms of how much I have of them, probably all coming in around with their own 25% or so.
Of the three, I had David Johnson just edging both Cook and Elliott in projections. Just point two, point three off, but I have David Johnson, the front runner. I think price definitely helps with that, especially on FanDuel. Ezekiel Elliott 8,800, Cook 8,200, and then it drops significantly to David Johnson at 6,800. The only thing is that you're looking for more of the passing game because of how the game flow has been for the Cardinals, and so it's really difficult on FanDuel for him to get those PPR points because it's not the same as DraftKings. So. But outside of that, I think all three are great plays, but I think David Johnson edges them just a little bit on DraftKings when it comes to the projection. Going into the main slate, it's gonna be nice. There's only 2 4:00 games, which I don't know how I feel about it. It's kind of interesting, but a lot of great games for the 1 o'clock games. We're gonna kick it off first. Cardinals Bengals over under 47. Cincinnati 3-point favorites. We talked about Auden Tate a little bit just now. This game seems to have a lot of firepower with a lot of ownership in different areas. Outside of who we talked about, Tate and David Johnson, is there anyone else that maybe we should be aware of? Anyone else in a good spot? I know we saw Tyler Eifert up there on the projections as far as ownership. Help us understand exactly people outside of Tate and Johnson at this point.
Yeah, so I'll start on the Cincinnati side. This is the game that's probably going to have the most talk. And there's, a couple of ways this can go. I've seen people saying you have 2 really bad defenses, lots of points, which for me makes sense. You have 2 really bad offensive lines, things can get a little bit wonky. I tend to agree with the 2 really bad defenses. Neither of these teams are forcing pressure. And the secondaries are just, the guys in these secondaries are just atrocious. I'll get into that in a second. But Joe Mixon stands out a little bit. I'm actually growing interest as the week goes on. He's projecting out pretty nicely. Arizona's giving up top 8 rushing yards in the league, 422 so far this year. And you're going to have the only issue here is that the line, right? The line's going to have 3 or 4 guys out, still monitoring the health. It seems like majority of these guys are still going to miss the game, but he'll get involved in the receiving game. Had 19 touches last week after not playing most of the fourth quarter. Credit Lofty for finding that one on the Tuesday show. But Mixon stands out a little bit. The price point's just too favorable, in my opinion. I think it's a nice spot, especially pivoting away from some of the top-owned running backs when it comes to ownership and also just price. And then Tyler Boyd in the slot against Tremaine Brock. Tremaine Brock is maybe bottom 5 slot cornerback in the league. He kind of contributes to how bad the secondary is. He's also undersized. And we know Tyler Boyd, all the hype's going to be on Auden Tate. You're still having some ownership come in on Tyler Boyd, but he's the better play. He's probably the best play from the Bengals overall. It's just a matter of his price points right there with Michael Thomas in that mid 6K range. Can you get to him? Can you get to both of them? I do think Boyd's the best play probably from the Bengals. Going to Arizona, Larry Fitzgerald is a guy to me that just makes all the sense in the world. So leading the league, if you just go through the first 4 weeks, not counting Thursday night's game where all the Rams receivers ran routes, but the first 4 weeks leading the league in routes run overall, leading the league out of the slot by 27 routes over the next closest guy, which is his teammate Christian Kirk. The guy already has 6 red zone targets. And right now, as I pull up the stats on this Cincinnati, so it doesn't just help Fitzgerald, but he's in the most beneficial spot, I would say, 9 targets per game, lots of red zone work. But this secondary for Cincinnati so far through 4 games, second worst in the league according to Pro Football Focus. This is where their top 3 coverage cornerbacks rank in the Pro Football Focus database. William Jackson, 75th. B.W. Webb, 109th. Drake Kirkpatrick, 110. Their safeties rank 83rd and 125th. So out of their top 5 defensive backs in terms of how many coverage snaps they're playing, they average a very, I would say, disgusting 100 rank in Pro Football Focus's database. So these guys are terrible. There's concerns of people saying, "Oh, don't you know, Sal, that Fitzgerald, the whole defense knows he's going to get the ball." Yeah, but he's a slot receiver. You don't double team slot receivers with a safety. You'll have one-on-one coverage on the outside all game. And also David Johnson's there to take pressure away in terms of being a playmaker. So Larry Fitzgerald is the main guy that I'm going to. I do think Keyshawn Johnson, Trent Sherfield coming in at single-digit ownership are interesting on the outside. I would have more interest in Farrell Cooper if he was in the DraftKings player pool. But for me, it's David Johnson, Kyler Murray, and Larry Fitz. I really like Larry Fitz at that price point. And I think he's coming in at average ownership, mid-teens right now, which I would consider average. I think he's on their own.
Do you think we'll see any Drake Kirkpatrick shadowing or being lined up with Fitzgerald?
If he does that in the slot, I think it just benefits even more Larry Fitzgerald. Right now, Drake Kirkpatrick is ranking as just 110th cornerback, and his coverage has been, I would say, pitiful so far. So if that's the case, yeah, I think that's even better. I don't know, though. I would say that, yeah, I would say that's probably where the primary matchup would be, and if that's the case, even more beneficial.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned that. I mean, I think quarterback rating against Drake Kirkpatrick this year, 121.9, 2 touchdowns, almost 200 yards. And a majority of the throws have been going against Drake Kirkpatrick's way when you look at it against any other cornerback. So I like that matchup. I'm also intrigued with last week. Clearly, I made a horrible mistake. I wrote up to fade Will Dissly. I just didn't believe in the upside or didn't believe the talent level would be there compared to the other matchups that were there of Waller and Ingram and Kelsey. Was completely wrong. And definitely wanted to dive into Eifert this week because he is projected to be somewhat owned, especially on DraftKings. He's got a great matchup. As we know, Arizona, this is the team. They're horrible against tight ends. And when you look at Eifert, he's had some great red zone targets. He's had 4. He does have 1 touchdown. But the only thing that concerns me is he as much of a target as compared to Dissly? And I'm okay if he gets 5 targets, 1 touchdown, 3 catches, 20 yards. That's fine. He's going to pay off. But I think he needs to score here. And I want to ask you, is he in position, or do you feel that he is in the same spot as compared to last week with Will Dissly?
No, he's definitely not being used the same in his offense. Like Eifert on the season is averaging below 50% snaps. CJ Uzuma is actually playing more, but Eifert is the red zone tight end. So if there's a game, he's already had a touchdown this year. If there's a game where Eifert's going to have 3 catches for 20 yards and 2 touchdowns, it's this one against a Cardinals team that's given up twice as many touchdowns to tight ends than anyone else. So I think Eifert is a guy I'll have very little exposure to. He's not a priority at all. And especially as the ownership has come up throughout the week, it's getting to a point now where he is becoming chalky, which again is fine for the price point at that position. But I probably lean not to get there more than I get there. But that said, I'll have very little. I'll have some exposure, but very little.
I think cash games that make sense for Eifert. I'm trying to distinguish the matchups right now as far as the other tight ends are on the board. I really like Ingram. I really like Waller. And I feel like these are also bounce back games for both of them. Waller being in a position where they'll probably be down and throwing more. But this is still to be determined. However, I'm still trying to figure it out. He does have 4 red zone targets, which does intrigue me. And so if that's the case, I need him to score. So does he have that potential? Probably. But is he involved in the passing game as much as Dissly is? I can't really say that because there is CJ as well, the second string tight end, who also is getting a lot of targets and a lot of snaps. So
yeah,
weird spot, but I'm going to look into it more coming in here into the final hours. But it's just something to maybe take into consideration, considering he does have more red zone targets than Tyler Boyd.
Yeah. I guess all I'll say is that John Ross being out, in theory, would help him a little bit. But also, Dissly's being used at all points of the field from last week, whereas Tyler Eifert is really just a red zone guy. So what you're doing there is you're betting on touchdowns, which becomes a little bit sketchy when it comes to like putting a lot of money on the line on that. So that's why I get a little bit of exposure.
Yeah, it's just, Will Dissly, I guess, no one was there to take snap shares away from him. And also, he was just in a way better spot with that offense. Next game, Bills-Titans, 39 over-under. Tennessee, 2.5-point favorites at home against the Bills. Me and Manny laughed about this game yesterday because we were like, not really sure I like anyone from this matchup. Josh Allen now is going to be playing. I hope that he's taking his health seriously and trying to recover that quick from the concussion protocol is a little bit interesting. I hope everything's okay with him. But outside of Derrick Henry, maybe a few shares that I want to sprinkle. Do you like anyone in this game? I'm curious to see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so even with Josh Allen playing, I agree. That hit was disgusting. So I guess he's all cleared, they said this morning, but no interest anywhere there. Devin Singletary with the hamstring injury seems like he's going to suit up. So just the offense in general gets better, but just no interest against this secondary. John Brown becomes a little bit better with Josh Allen in there, but nothing from Buffalo. Tennessee, I do like Delaney Walker a little bit, but it's kind of a loaded week this week at tight end, and there's other guys that I have a lot of interest in that we'll get to in other games. So last week you saw him not be involved too much, Delaney Walker, but they got ahead. They ran 27 times with Henry, and they put their blocking tight ends on the field like Jonnu Smith. So this week in the middle of the field against his own defense, it funnels to the middle of the field into running backs with a non-pass catching running back primarily and Henry back there. I think Walker sees a little bit more targets. I would project him to lead the team in receiving. But outside of that, not much interest. A.J. Brown, sure, he's having big plays, and I really like him. His comp was Julio coming out of college. He looked like that on that first touchdown run last week, but he did it on 3 targets, not on the field a ton. Corey Davis is going to get a shadow matchup with Tre'Davious White. So for me, it's just a little bit Delaney Walker, and that's about it from this one.
Yeah, I mean, to be quite honest with you, maybe I like the defenses in this matchup. Obviously you want to spread out when utilizing defenses, especially if you're multi-entering. And I don't think either of these defenses are a bad choice. I like the Titans D. We saw kind of what they've been doing the last couple of weeks. They're pretty stingy. And I think, honestly, outside of that, I don't know if there's really anyone that is worth rostering the more I continue to talk about it and look at it. So, we can move on. Bears and Raiders. This is going to be a London game. Usually the London games aren't on the slate because they're played at an earlier time. However, they're fitting it in here. They're going to be playing at 1 p.m. Eastern. Bears at Raiders, the way that they have it set up. Chicago, 5.5-point favorites, 40 over/under. I'm curious to see what you talk about with Jacobs, Waller, these guys from Oakland. But also, there's been a lot of talk about Montgomery, and I would love to have you break this down. Is Montgomery worth playing here, and is this a good spot for the Bears running back?
Yeah, so I'll start on the Oakland side. We have to keep an eye on Tyrell Williams' game time decision. J.J. Nelson hasn't been practicing, so I do think Darren Waller is a fine play. So Roquan Smith, linebacker for the Bears, one of the stout linebackers for this defense. He traveled with the team. There's just been weird stuff going on with the team. Hasn't been reporting, not for injury purposes. Just they haven't disclosed it. But Roquan Smith's traveling. If he's going to be playing it, a little bit worse for Darren Waller. But, I mean, where else do they go with the ball if, say, Tyrell Williams doesn't play? So I think Waller's still fine. This Bears defense hasn't been shutting down tight ends. I mean, to average tight ends like Noah Fant, rookie, Jimmy Graham, they've been giving up decent games, close to 10 fantasy points. So Waller running more routes than both those guys. I think it's a decent spot. Josh Jacobs not going to get there, but Akeem Hicks is going to be, I believe, questionable. Game time decision is the last thing I saw on him for the Bears, just looking at that now. Game time decision. So he's a defensive tackle, big run stop player. If he's out, it helps Jacobs a little bit, but not the script that I want to get there for a guy who, even though last week they said they want to use him more in the passing game, we didn't see it. So Oakland, just Darren Waller. I think he's too cheap, and I think people are going to overreact to the matchup. DraftKings might have a little bit by the price point, but I don't think it's that tough for a guy just getting force-fed the ball at a clip of 30% of the target share. Chicago side, I actually like some of these pieces here. So, David Montgomery, you mentioned. I think the price point's pretty nice. We've seen his touches come up every single week. Now, maybe that changes, but Mike Davis over the last 2 weeks, no snaps last week, 2% of the snaps the week before. Tariq Cohen, when they're using him, they are using him in the slot still. So when Montgomery's on the field, he's getting the touches. We saw over 20 last week, 16-plus touches in 3 straight weeks. And it's a matchup against Oakland that is bottom 3 run defense. They put Marquell Lee on injured reserve, a guy who's not out there a ton, but a rotational linebacker who would have been needed more now that Vontaze Burfict is done for the season. So 2 linebackers on their depth chart are knocked off in a matter of a week. That only helps the running game more. In a game script that, they're not home, the Bears, playing in London, but they are favorites by a decent amount. So I do like Montgomery. My pause with Montgomery comes for GPPs. Like cash, sure, the price point's nice, gets you 13, 14 fantasy points, you feel good about it. Do I think he has that huge upside? It's similar to a Leonard Fournette situation last week where he's starting to get the volume now, which we expected, and we're kind of worried not seeing week 1. It's just a matter of can he kind of put it together and have some big runs. So I do like Montgomery. An interesting sneaky play that I'm even scared to get to, but Tariq Cohen, they might put him out there with Chase Daniels. He's been the most targeted guy with Chase Daniels by a wide margin when Daniels has played over the past couple of years in place of Mitch. So I think Tariq Cohen's a very, very sneaky, like a Millie Maker type play. If you're playing in a huge field like that, no need to have him in 3 maxes, single entries. Allen Robinson, I think, is fine at 5,600 as well, just to have nothing in terms of a ceiling game, but his floor is still there with Chase Daniels. I don't think it's that big of a drop off from Mitch Trubisky outside of maybe mobility purposes.
I feel like Waller is definitely in a great spot here, especially if the Bears go up and they're just going to pass. I don't know if the Raiders can run or establish a running game against this stout defense. I mean, even though Cook, for fantasy purposes, got there last week, I mean, he had a lot of receptions, but I mean, he was just shut down in the running game. I mean, they were fully attacking it. So if they stack the box, especially if Tyrell's out, I feel like they're going to really force Carr to kind of throw the ball. But I mean, Waller's not a tight end. He's a wideout. I mean, let's just be honest. This guy is a physical freak of nature. The way that he plays is just 2-dimensional. I mean, he does things as a tight end, but he catches like a wideout. And the targets are there. The receptions are there as well. So from a DraftKings perspective, he's great. From FanDuel perspective, he's great. The only thing I wish with Waller is if they need to throw him the ball more in the red zone. It's just he's not getting enough red zone targets, and he's such a big athletic guy. I would love to see Carr feed him more. So I love Waller here. I think it's a great play, especially if Tyrell's out. I mean, he's going to be even more of a go-to guy for Carr. And, with the tight end, I don't really see them, being able to stop him the entire game. I feel like he'll find ways to at least hit value and get there. But outside of that, I think Montgomery, I'm still looking into it. I think with what we've seen is Tariq Cohen is, just more of a pass catching back for them and nothing more. I love the amount of carries that Montgomery got last week. I feel like if that's the way that they want to go, it makes sense for this offense. But also with the injury to Trubisky, I feel like they want to be more safe. And the safe play is to establish the run and throw for Chase Daniels when he needs to. Nothing against Chase Daniels, but I think that's maybe what the offensive mindset is at this point. Be safe, control the clock, and that's kind of where I'm at with that. So outside of that, though, any other plays I'm not really too keen on. This next game, however, different story. Buccaneers, Saints, 3-point favorite for the Saints at home, over under 45.5. Lot of interesting plays here. Last week, we saw something very strange. The 1% Chris Godwin just took over the DFS universe. Never in my life have I been so sick to my stomach because I had so many shares of Mike Evans and not enough Godwin. Talk to me. Are we attacking both sides here? And also, can we please just break down the Saints D a little quick that shut down the Cowboys Sunday night?
Yeah, so I'll start there. The Sunday night game, it was weird. I think the run defense is underrated, and it's a solid run defense. We saw them. But I think a big part of that came down to Dallas just not adjusting. Like, you've been a team that's throwing the ball with success the first 3 weeks of the season, and then they just continued to try and force feed Zeke, which usually isn't a bad idea. But when you're getting 2 yards a clip, it is a pretty bad idea. So it just looked like Kellen Moore, the whole offense was out of sync there. I think this will be a different story this week against a team that just doesn't want to run the ball for the most part and wants to throw a lot. So New Orleans secondary, Marshawn Lattimore had his first good week last week, limiting Amari to a decent extent, but still on the season giving up the most receptions, even with that good game, and most yards, but it's trending positively. And you have PJ Williams in the slot. Great tackler, I'll keep saying, but not that great when it comes to coverage. So Godwin, if we get to the Tampa Bay offense here, Godwin once again draws a really favorable matchup. The price point is back to where it was 2 weeks ago. If you want to get there, it's totally fine. It's just right around that 6K range that we've been talking about with Boyd, Michael Thomas. Another guy I'll name in there is Juju, who has a favorable matchup if he's healthy. But yeah, Chris Godwin's in that range if you want to get to some of him. It kills me too last week because maybe Tuesday, even Wednesday, I was high on Godwin, and then the injuries scared me off. And wrongfully on my part, not just trying to see if they were going to call up any wide receivers from the practice squad to kind of indicate things. They didn't, which would have indicated he seems healthy. Not really a game time decision. So I think he's fine this week. Evans, yeah, historically, Lattimore shut him down, but a lot of that came in Lattimore's just dominant rookie season. Last year, Lattimore regressed. So far this year, he's been below average, if anything. So I think Evans is fine as well. But my issue here is I don't want to get to this stack compared to others. And I was saying this last week and it burnt me. But there's other spots that I'm trying to prioritize in my own individual games. So getting to Jameis and Evans and Godwin, spending up for all of that is really tough. So I primarily am picking off little pieces of Godwin. And that's it. Nothing from the running game here, although Ronald Jones is trending in the right direction. New Orleans side, it's really just Michael Thomas. I'm not going to attack Alvin Kamara this week. It's a really brutal matchup, and it's the exact thing I need to kind of distinguish between these top-end running backs is just see a really bad matchup. Bucs number 1 overall run defense and limiting running backs to the third fewest receptions in the league.
Marshawn Lattimore this year has given up almost 400 yards and 2 touchdowns and a 61% completion percentage thrown against him. Eli Apple, however, only 13 attempts and 117 yards, no touchdowns. But you just mentioned something. The Bucs rush D. Alvin Kamara is projected to be highly owned, I believe, on FanDuel, if I'm not mistaken. I just want to check this one more time. Yes, he is at 19.3%. So he's almost in the 20 percentile. Number 1 rush defense. However, though, Kamara is not necessarily your running back who attacks in the backfield as far as rushing. A majority of his stuff comes from the passing game, from check downs, from running routes, from screens, and also getting into the end zone off these pass catching opportunities. Is it okay or is it warranted to go ahead and roster Kamara this week? Do you feel like this is a high upside play, or do you feel like this front line of the Bucs defense is actually legit and there's really not that much upside as anticipated maybe for the FanDuel ownership for people who are playing on FanDuel?
Yeah, this front line's really good. With Sue, Vita Vea, Shaq Barrett's just up there in terms of league leaders in sacks right now. He didn't practice Wednesday, but he should be good to go. So right now, this Bucs front, yeah, it's too much for me. The upside for Kamara comes in the passing game. They're even limiting that to an extent. And here's the thing: DraftKings, he's half the ownership as all these other top end running backs, but I think it's warranted here. We saw 2 weeks ago Kamara just destroy everybody at low ownership in terms of having a nuclear game. Much different matchup there for him. I'm just not going to get to Kamara. I really believe in this front. And the way to just beat Tampa is pretty obvious. Attack their bottom 5 pass defense instead of their number 1 run defense.
And then any love for, someone asked about Teddy Bridgewater. Any love for Teddy Bridgewater?
I mean, at the price point, he grades out as like good quote unquote value. But I'm not trusting Teddy Bridgewater in cash. And then when it comes to value in a tournament, you don't really want that. So he just doesn't fit anywhere for me in terms of formats.
And someone said, talked about Kamara's rushing. And I mean, 13 for 45 yards, 16 for 69 yards, 17 for 69 yards. And it's not that he's not being necessarily an efficient runner, but I mean, when you're getting 7 receptions for 72 yards, 9 receptions for 92 yards and a touchdown, this is kind of where Kamara thrives the most, in my opinion. And in this is also the red zone opportunities as well. So, it's not that he's not an efficient runner. He is, but the majority and bulk of the fantasy points that you're normally getting is out of the passing game, in my opinion. I don't know if you feel differently about that. We'd love to just see if you have any insight on that as well.
Yeah, in terms of Kamara, I do think he's elusive and effective on the ground. But when we just talk about any of these pass-catching running backs, it comes with their floor and their ceiling are primarily carried from their pass-catching work. So in a bad matchup like this, if he didn't have the receiving game work, I would have zero interest. I still don't have much interest, but because of the fact that he can get active in the receiving game, albeit not a good matchup, that's why he's still being considered by people like us, or at least talked about, compared to like if Derrick Henry was in this situation.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to maybe some different matchups this week, especially his price point, I think I might like Zeke more, or David Johnson, or even McCaffrey or Cook. And it's nothing against. I'm not saying that. I think Kamara is one of the most skillful, talented running backs in the league. However, though, in this situation, I think on FanDuel, you're looking more of the ground game. And in the passing game, it really helps people on DraftKings. So it's just an interesting, kind of insight and look. The next game is probably a game that a lot of people want to hear because I've seen it in the chat. People talking about Kirk Cousins, the passing game with the Vikings. Now we got Gallman on the other side. Do we roster him again? Vikings, Giants, 43 over under. Minnesota only 5-point favorites. Giants seem to get a little bit of love here. As far as maybe I thought maybe it'd be 7, maybe 7.5. However, though, 99 attempts through 4 games for Kirk Cousins. I think it's the lowest in the league in passing attempts. Running game is obviously there. We know that. But let's talk about the Thielen situation and Diggs. I really think this is the week the passing game goes off, especially against the Giants secondary that's inexperienced, that's not strong. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I would say I have more interest in Thielen. I do think this like little squeaky wheel narrative for both these guys now, but more so for Thielen adds up. He has 40% air yards for his team. He's just, in my opinion, the more preferred target of Cousins. And he just handled his business better in terms of saying we need to pass more instead of Diggs kind of demanding a trade after he had a 100-plus yard game and the most passing volume from the team. So it's a little bit weird to me that it came up. Maybe it's just built up frustration, other things in the locker room. I still just heavily prefer the running game, especially as their favorite. So it makes sense. Like a bottom 5, if not the worst secondary in the league right now is what you're dealing with in the Giants. You had Janoris Jenkins named like defensive player of the week. I don't know how. I don't know if it was just for the Giants. I saw a tweet from that, but yeah, I don't think this is a spot where they're just going to completely flip their whole narrative. Maybe you get 2-3 more targets in the passing game for both Diggs and Thielen, which helps, but it gets me onto some Thielen. I probably don't have much Diggs, and I'm not going to be stacking this side of it. I just think it's a great spot for Cook, who's in exactly a matchup that you want him to be as a favorite in an offense that I see more times than not in this game. Cook having 23 carries, Alexander Mattison coming in with 7, the rookie, and you have another 28 pass attempt game for Cousins, and maybe some of the volume gets a little bit more concentrated towards Thielen. But it's just a spot where I'm still going to lean on the way they've been playing so far and the way they want to play, and that's just through Dalvin Cook.
Man, I agree with you. I love Cook here, so I'm not against it. But they got to throw the ball, man. Like, they have to make these star wide receivers happy. Like, there's just too much turmoil right now for them to be 2-2. And this early in the season, they're not going to be able to move forward if they don't adjust this game plan. I know Gary Kubiak is loving right now what they're doing with Cook, establishing the run. But I do feel like if there's any game out of any time of this schedule, the most important game is probably this one for the culture and for the camaraderie of this offense and for them to at least be able to eat as well. So, I mean, they're going to be going up against Janoris Jenkins and DeAndre Baker, who have both struggled heavily this year in the passing game as far as the defense for the secondary. There's a lot of inexperience here. I feel like Kirk Cousins, he's a vet. He can maybe pick apart this defense. I mean, I don't want to take last week with the Giants what they did with the Redskins, because that's just not fair. That's an anomaly. Redskins are atrocious in their offense, and they also had an unprepared Haskins play almost the entire game. But I do feel like Diggs and Thielen need to be looked at in some way. I'm not saying that it's a for sure needed to roster, but I feel like there's a lot of upside there, and their price points justify that. So point per dollar, I mean, in GPP purposes, I feel like this is somewhat of an upside play, especially if they get their targets and they get red zone shares. On the other side of the ball, Gallman. We had someone just talk about, is Gallman another play this week? Can we run it back with Gallman? If you can, break it down for everyone in chat as far as Gallman's upside, and is this a play against this Vikings D?
Man, yeah, so the matchup against the Vikings D is pretty terrible. Saquon for somehow is just recovering so quick. So this might be one of the final weeks. They're on a short week. Maybe we get 2 more weeks out of Gallman. The price point's still nice, but he just made everything he could have out of his touches last week in terms of scoring touchdowns, in terms of breaking off big plays with his touches. Like, he was on the field 60% of the snaps. Hilliman actually saw way more snaps than I thought, at 38%. So Gallman, the price point's favorable, but there's just other guys in that range. The Aaron Jones, a little bit more. Joe Mixon, cheaper David Montgomery. I like all those guys more if you have the money or if you don't. Then Gallman, he's a guy who's seeing a ton of just targets when he's on the field in terms of every 10 snaps, seeing a target according to Adam1110 on Twitter. But it's just not a spot this week that I want to get there, because on the ground, at least, it's a really brutal matchup for Gallman. So last week I was on him a lot, and I think that's the week that you kind of have to leave him there, at least maybe on the short week showdown. He'll be valuable. But outside of Gallman, or not even really having interest in Gallman, but outside of that, Evan Ingram actually has a good matchup here. Minnesota is going to show through a small sample that they're average, middle of the pack against tight ends. But against the good tight ends they've played, they've not played great. So Austin Hooper, and then we know Darren Waller had that 14 target, 13 reception game. So Ingram, just the main priority, as it has been pretty much every week. The big thing to talk about here is Golden Tate comes back. Golden Tate suspended 4 games, so this wasn't an injury. It's not like he has to work his way back in. He played in the preseason, so he's conditioned. He's going to take over the slot role, if I had to guess, pushing Sterling Shepard to the outside against Xavier Rhodes. Shepard becomes just a much worse play, somebody I don't even want in regular season, just season-long leagues now. Golden Tate's going to take on that role where Shepard led the team in receiving and receptions the last 2 weeks. So I think Golden Tate's actually interesting at a very cheap price point, GPP-only type play. But for the most part, it's just Evan Ingram from the Giants, and then really just Thielen and Cook from Minnesota for me.
Yeah, I'm not really big on Gallman this week. I feel like last week was the week to utilize him at that price point with that matchup, bottom 3 defense. Nothing more said. I mean, to be quite honest with you, he got his 2 big touchdowns in 2 unique scenarios. He was the last option for that passing touchdown, and then he also got the short rush. But outside of that, I mean, this Vikings defense is a little bit different from the Redskins, a little bit better front 4. But outside of that, I mean, I just feel like there's way better options this week at the running back position. And so I feel like Gallman for me is just really nowhere to be found. Maybe he shows up or populates in 1 or 2 lineups out of 150. But outside of that, it's a no-go for me. Next game, though, there's a lot of options I like on one side of the field, especially the defense. Jets at Eagles, 43.5 over-under, 14-point favorite for Philadelphia. Sam Darnold still out, still has the mono situation. Going to be seen, not a great backup quarterback in the Jets. Eagles are going to be going up against a Jets defense that struggles, especially against slot receivers, especially against playmakers. I don't think they're able to guard tight ends as well. This secondary is just not good. Yes, they do have Jamal Adams. He's probably the only positive outlook in this secondary. Love to see what you think about Wentz, the passing game, and anything from the Jets side as far as maybe playing a wide receiver. Do you see any upside there?
Yes, I'll start on the Philly side. I had interest early in the week in Carson Wentz. I still do. Other guys have jumped him, though. Probably a 5th or 6th interest of mine now. But he grades out well. No Deshaun Jackson. It hurts a little bit, but Alshon's back. Double teams in the middle of the field against Zach Ertz will pretty much disappear now. And people are telling me that, the Jets defense against tight ends has been brutal. Yeah, if you look at it, like in terms of fantasy points allowed, they're like 2nd lowest in the league, whatever it might be. want to know who they faced this year? Tom Sweeney, Demetrius Harris, and Ryan Izzo have been the primary tight ends they faced. So when it comes to tight ends, defense versus position, especially earlier in the season, it can be very skewed, and that's exactly what you're seeing here. Zach Ertz is miles ahead of all those tight ends. So I would expect probably some Jamal Adams in the secondary actually seeing coverage on Zach Ertz, because I don't know who else guards him. But even then, it's still a mismatch for Ertz. So I like Ertz. I think Alshon Jeffrey has a good matchup on the outside. These Jets cornerbacks are some of the weakest cornerback just pool in speaking of pool in the league. But Brian Poole, like the only decent cornerback they have in terms of coverage. So yeah, I think it's interesting. The only concern here is Darnold's not playing. So now do they go very much run heavy later in the game, which hurts the overall ceiling of a guy like Wentz. But stack wise, I think Alshon, Ertz, and Wentz is a lower owned stack that makes sense. Another thing is that the Jets, we mentioned earlier, CJ Mosley not expected to play, and now Quinnen Williams trending towards not playing after in the beginning of the week seeming like he was going to play. Those guys open up a lot of running lanes on the ground. So Miles Sanders, Jordan Howard, I don't like them, but it just leans more incentive to go to the ground, which hurts the passing game. So this can go either way. I think having some small exposures, I'll probably have in 3 maxes, maybe one lineup with the Philly stack here and there. The Jets side, no interest. I had some in Robbie Anderson because this is just a dream matchup for any wide receiver that has speed and can burn you. Robbie Anderson's had really tough matchups against Stephon Gilmore, Denzel Ward, Tre'Davious White, 3 top 15 shadow cornerbacks in the league so far. But now with Luke Falk in there, I just can't trust it. I can't put my money behind that.
Yeah, I really like Alshon Jeffrey, especially if Darryl Roberts or Nate Hairston is matched up with him. Both of these two have struggled significantly this year against big wideouts. Jamal Adams, I feel like he definitely will be in some situations of guarding Ertz, so that definitely hurts Ertz in my opinion. I think Jamal Adams is lights out, best playmaker on that defense for the Jets secondary. But another thing I want to talk about is this 43.5 over-under is a little weird to me, and I say that because you look at the Bills-Titans game, 39.5 over-under, and I feel like, yes, that makes sense, but maybe that could be a better game offensively than the Jets because the Jets just can't move the ball, man. I mean, they haven't scored an offensive touchdown in over 2 weeks, the last 2 games. And not only that, their big plays, they're last in the league of only 2 plays of over 25 yards. I mean, through 4 games, I mean, that's completely horrible. They don't have playmakers. I think Darnold being out doesn't really help anyone. I don't know if they're going to be able to move the ball, to be quite honest with you. And it's not saying that the Eagles have a great defense, but the offense is just that bad. However, I do feel like if Wentz can continue what he did last week in Green Bay, and this is one thing I want to point out, and I don't know if people will agree, as someone did just said it in the chat, Le'Veon Bell. I think Le'Veon Bell is in a very interesting situation because of the kind of game script that could bode well for him in this matchup. Le'Veon Bell has been getting a lot of checkdowns, a lot of targets thrown his way, and he's running a lot. 18 attempts, 21 attempts, 17 attempts. Yeah, the yards per carry, yards per attempt isn't there, but then you got the targets. 9 targets last game, 10 targets the game before that, scored a touchdown in his last game as well. And I just feel like maybe he'll go under the radar. And if Wentz moves the offense, they're scoring 43.5 over under, which makes me to believe that they're projecting the Eagles to score a somewhat of a decent amount of points here. I could see Le'Veon Bell being a sneak play for a running back because, I mean, outside of that, Le'Veon Bell is going to be the only way they're able to move the ball and able to even stay in this game, in my opinion.
Yeah, he's definitely like their best playmaker on the team. You still don't have Chris Herndon as a tight end, so there's just not much here. But Le'Veon Bell, the only upside for him here is that the Eagles just stout defensive line when it comes to running the ball, but they do give up receptions, 6th most in the league to the running back. They are bottom 10 in terms of how many yards they're giving up in terms of yardage to running back. So there's upside there for a guy who's still top 10 even after his bye in routes run as a running back. I personally just won't get there because it grades out similarly, although a much cheaper price point, as Alvin Kamara for me, except you have in that cheap range guys like Fournette who will get usage a little bit lower, like some of the guys we talked about or will talk about, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon. So Bell is interesting because he's going to be unowned, and that's really what you want to play. It's just it hurts for me a little bit getting there just because of that defensive line. It makes him very one-dimensional, which is obviously the upside.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, it's basically understanding the ownership and the upside from Bell. So, low owned, high upside plays sometimes help, just like that Chris Godwin play last week. Ravens at Steelers is our next game, Sal. 44 over under, Baltimore 3.5 point favorites. We just saw the Steelers D kind of revitalize this past week against the Bengals, shut them down completely on Monday Night Football. Lamar Jackson was shut down kind of as well, not from a fantasy perspective because the rushing was there, but we saw Brown's defense really kind of put hold on this Ravens offense to a certain extent. I mean, you take away that Will Snead late touchdown, there's really not much to account for there. How do we feel about this game? Do we see a lot of offense coming from here? Is Lamar Jackson still in play maybe for cash purposes? Help us understand what's going on here.
Yeah, so the Baltimore side of this, Mark Andrews still dealing with a foot injury. It's an interesting spot for me because he played through it last week, scores a touchdown, but that pretty much salvaged his week. So with a deep tight end pool, I'm probably not getting there as much unless you're stacking this. I usually pay down for quarterbacks or a little bit in the 5K range when it comes to cash. So I might not get to Lamar there, but the guy is a really good matchup in terms of having a ceiling game again, like we saw a few weeks back on the ground. Steelers play a lot of man-to-man coverage, and what you get from that is usually just a quarterback, if he is mobile, is going to have more running lanes and more opportunity to run. So Lamar, I get to him more so as a one-off here, if anything. I'll probably have small pieces of him because, I mean, he's just been a top 10 cornerback or quarterback every single week so far. He's put up fantastic numbers. Hollywood Brown is the main target. You talk about Willie Snead having some fluke touchdowns so far, but Hollywood Brown should have had a touchdown last week. He's still a dynamic player. This secondary, though, is one that won't let you beat them deep with Minka back there. It got a lot better, as obviously just seems it would with Minka Fitzpatrick coming there. Hollywood Brown as a GPP play is interesting to me, but it seems a little bit thin. So Lamar as a one-off is like the only probable spot I get to Baltimore.
Man, I kind of like Brown this week, man. I think this is a bounce back game for him. I mean, yeah, the targets have been there, but once again, this has been a defense that has been exposed in some areas in the passing game, but I just feel as if there's a great matchup for him. And, his price point, it's his price point with his big play opportunities that really have intrigued me. I think Marquise Brown is, I believe, third or fourth in air yards on the season, but a lot of yards after the catch. He's got 18 receptions on the year. Hasn't really done anything in the last game, 2 games, if you really want to point this out. Maybe as far as, big upside DFS perspective, was a huge disappointment last week. But I feel like this matchup for him is a little bit different. He's going to be facing a couple safeties that have given up a lot of big plays. Cameron Kelly and Terrell Edmonds have both struggled against deep play, big play wideouts this year, both giving up a few touchdowns. And I also want to see who's going to be shadowing him. Do you think we'll see Hayden, Sutton, or Mike Hilton on Marquise Brown throughout the game?
If I had to guess, it would be Hayden. I don't know if there'll be a shadow matchup here, though. But if I had to guess, it would be Hayden. But I do agree with you. The price point actually does make it really interesting. And this is like I wouldn't say obvious, but like the standard spot where last week, late in the week, Marquise Brown, with all those injuries to the Brown secondary, becomes super, super popular. Lots of discussion around him in the DFS community, and then he tanks. So everybody's just going to run from him this week. But we know the big play upside hasn't changed. The matchup has a little bit, but his upside hasn't. So, yeah, in a GPP, big field, it does make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I love him on FanDuel. Last week, I mean, he had 7 targets, and he had 3 red zone targets, 2 inside the 20, 1 inside the 10. I mean, if he catches one of those, he was still cheap to some extent. I think it was 6,300. He hits value. So, I want to see kind of how they move the ball this week. Last week wasn't necessarily the best of situations, but I'm curious to see how they kind of adjust. And I just like it because of a price point and play upside, especially on FanDuel. But outside of that, let's go to our next game, Sal. Patriots, Redskins. I got nothing to say about the Redskins. I'm just going to, let you talk about the Patriots. But New England 16-point favorites, 42.5 over-under. Defense has been dominated all year for the Patriots. I mean, they've just been crushing. Is this a Patriots defense that we can roster again? And how do you feel about the way that they've spread the ball with a lot of people getting touches? Who can we go to for the Patriots offense?
Yeah, put it up now. I think that the Patriots are obviously the side here. I think they still have the highest team total, or at least it was to open the week. So I think all the offensive pieces look good. I prefer probably in this order, Josh Gordon, Philip Dorsett, just because of price, and then Julian Edelman. So I think stacks here make some sense. Look, you have a Patriots team that's huge favorites. So traditionally and historically, you don't like playing quarterbacks as a big favorite, but we've seen it this year 3 times already. And in the past, Brady just won't leave the game unless it's an absolute rout like it was the Jets a couple weeks back. But week 1, and then throwing touchdowns week 2 against Miami in a blowout in 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. So I think there's upside there. You finally get Josh Gordon, who doesn't have a crazy matchup against him in terms of a shadow cornerback like Tre'Davious Howard or Xavier Howard or Tre'Davious White or Xavier Howard so far this year. So I think it's a good spot for Howard or Josh Gordon when you factor in his price point. I think Dorsett, when you factor in his price point, also a good spot. So I like the outside receivers. Edelman, if you want to pay a little bit more, is fine too. So it's just a matter of where do you go. This is the biggest headache every single week when it comes for me projecting it. Just this team. When it comes to the backfield, is it going to be just a smash down your throat Sony Michel game, or is it going to be Tom Brady just says, screw it, I've been playing bad, I'm going to throw 5 touchdowns? So it's really tough. I lean to the passing game here. And you mentioned it, Washington, it seems at least maybe obvious to me that they put Colt McCoy in here because you're playing this stout New England defense. And it's just sort of like, okay, let's just waste Colt McCoy on this game. And then maybe we go back seeing if Keenum's healthier, if we want to try and get back with Dwayne Haskins. But nothing on Washington stands out. If for some reason you really are begging to run it back with somebody, I guess Chris Thompson, but we say that almost every week, and it rarely pays off when he's just a one-dimensional receiver pretty much out of the backfield. So really just some interest in New England, but not much overall from this game, not much exposure.
The one question I want to ask you about Edelman is that he's 6,500 on FanDuel, and I know that you play DraftKings primarily, but do you feel like 6,500 if we see an Edelman healthy and he's going to get his snaps? Is this okay play for FanDuel?
Yeah, I would say it is. Like, he came in last week questionable. Same thing's going to happen this week, and he looked fine. So we know that he's probably the favorite target. This is just a week for me where you finally have a soft overall defense. You're not playing a zone defense. You're not playing a shutdown corner. Like, even though Miami's terrible overall, they have a shutdown corner in Howard. So I think you do see a bigger week, or at least a little bit more of a priority to get the ball to Josh Gordon, who's just been suppressed for 2 out of the last 3 weeks.
Next game is the battle of the volume running backs, the 2 highest volume running backs in the league. Jaguars at Panthers, over under 40, Carolina 3-point favorites. McCaffrey against Fournette, the 2 ground and pound guys that are just a part of the offense almost every single play. We talked about McCaffrey. You can harp on him yet again if you want to. But outside of McCaffrey, do we see anything going on here in this game for fantasy purposes?
Yeah, so I'll start on Carolina. McCaffrey's, everybody knows what he is. He's running the most routes with David Johnson, still tied after 2 weeks in a row of that. He's getting, on average, 29 opportunities per game, which is just ridiculous after touching the ball 37 times last week. And what it comes down to here is just, do you want to pay all the way up for him? He'll restrict your lineup a little bit, say over a guy like David Johnson, who grades out similar to McCaffrey for me, still less fantasy points, but pretty close for the price point. Point per dollar better David Johnson for me right now. So McCaffrey probably ranks in as my 3rd interest out of those top guys, behind Zeke, behind David Johnson, but it's not by much. Like I said, I'm going to have some balanced exposure. You look at Jalen Ramsey not being in, it allowed the Denver offense overall to have a very successful day. Joe Flacco last week, 300-plus yards. So that being said, I don't like it as much for Kyle Allen. I think it helps Curtis Samuel the most. DJ Moore has usually been getting the number 1 cornerbacks for the last couple of weeks, which would mean AJ Boye on DJ Moore. But the big issue here is Kyle Allen's he's not throwing that deep often. These 2 receivers, since Allen took over, both outside the top 50 in air yards, something that we're seeing similar happening in Minnesota. And we know that they don't have as much upside there, and they have probably a better quarterback. So not much on Carolina outside of McCaffrey. Jacksonville, I don't know how Fournette's still this cheap. I mean, we see him continue to get volume. 3rd in the league in routes run. He's becoming a true game flow independent running back without a doubt. 13 more routes run than Kamara so far. Top 5 in targets. So I think Fournette's definitely still in play at that price point. He's still going to grade out well. You're not going to have any K1 short on Carolina's defensive front. They're banged up already on defense in both their front and their secondary. So Fournette seems like a play for me, and I really, really like D.D. Westbrook this week. Carolina's been struggling in the slot. Chris Conley will have a beneficial matchup with no Dante Jackson for Carolina, again, for a 2nd straight week. But it's Fournette for me. And honestly, the most exposure I'm getting is D.D. Westbrook in the slot. They've just been torched in the slot. 15 catches to the Cardinals, 7 catches to Cooper Kupp week 1, and then they got torched by Godwin week 2. So I like that spot for Westbrook.
Any love for DJ Shark?
Not much love for me there. He's going to get the James Bradbury treatment, which Bradbury so far this year has been very good. In the past, or historically, not a shutdown elite cornerback, but I would say he's right there in terms of being a top 10 cornerback. So no love for Shark this week. Right now I'm getting some 3 max lineups with DD in it.
Yeah, Bradbury, 31.9 quarterback rating against, one of the lowest for corners. Also, Ross Cockrell, 1.7 quarterback rating against, over 11 attempts, 1 pick. Bradbury, 1 pick as well. I think this could be a great situation for the Panthers defense to roster. Kind of underrated in my opinion, especially, what we've seen the last 2 weeks out of them with Arizona and with Texans. Both, essentially call it how you want, regardless of rushing yards that we saw from Kyle Murray. They sacked him 8 times. They got to the Texans D last week, shut down Hopkins, shut down Fuller, really shut down Watson essentially as well. It was a really great game from that D. Do we have any love for the D here against Gardner Minshew?
Yeah, I do. It's coming in though, like highly owned as a defense, which is concerning to me because we know how variant that can be. The defense overall is good, but like I said, no Dante Jackson, which opens up their secondary. Jackson hasn't been fantastic this year, but he limits big plays because he's just really, really fast. Now you have Conley, a guy who does have speed there, going to have a more beneficial matchup. So when a defense, I do think in games like cash, it seems okay. For me, I just kind of, whatever fits in, like you said earlier, balance out your defense exposures. So that's what I'll do here. I won't go overweight on the Panthers. And the fact that they are getting a lot of ownership, I think the highest owned defense in double digits right now, it's just a spot where I know it's a very variant position. I probably don't follow the herd as much there.
And I guess the last game, rounding out the 1 o'clock games on the East Coast, is a game I want to talk about. Falcons at Texans, one of the highest over-unders on this slate. Actually, I think it might be the highest over-under now. Yep, it's at 50. 4-point favorites for the Texans. A lot of weapons here. I want to talk about Will Fuller. Break it down for us. How do we feel about this matchup?
Yeah, so this is my favorite spot on the slate, as most weeks it probably should. It seems like a game with Cincinnati and Arizona is drawing a lot of ownership away from this one, which is always good. Highest total, like you said, on the slate. So starting on Houston's side, like you said, with Will Fuller, I think the price point's still just too cheap on him. Last week missed a 75-yard touchdown because it's just overthrown. It's been harped on this week with that. Still getting targets on the field, like 99% of snaps. A lot of stuff hasn't come to fruition for him. But if indeed Kenny Stills is out, that helps him a little bit, helps Kiki more. He's just not leaving the field and still getting targets, and now he has a beneficial matchup. So when I factor in the price point and you factor in that I do want to stack this game both ways with Ryan and with Watson, I'm going to be getting to Will Fuller. But I think the most interesting piece of this game, and there's so many pieces that you can get to, for me is getting game stacks, and I probably lean Ryan over Watson due to price. Second in the league, Matt Ryan right now. In terms of overall passing yards. And when you factor in the Texans defense, they'll look like a decent defense in terms of passing coverage, but it's very much skewed. When they played Drew Brees, almost 400 yards, giving up multiple touchdowns. Phillip Rivers over 300 and multiple touchdowns. They only shut down Kyle Allen and Gardner Minshew in his first career start. So I think that this is a very beneficial spot for Matt Ryan. And I really like the idea of getting to both Julio and Hopkins, which that does restrict you from getting to 2 top-end running backs. But I like what it sets you up there for. These guys are relatively cheap to the top-end running backs, and they have that same ceiling and, in my opinion, floor in this matchup. So this is my favorite game on the stack, on the week-to-game stack and team stack. I'm getting to both sides of it in 3-max and 20-max, really whatever I'm playing. And I am experimenting with getting to both Hopkins and Julio, running it back with each of those guys, pairing you with the game stack.
So I want to talk about one thing first. Will Fuller, okay? I'm trying to understand why so much love for this guy. And don't get me wrong here, but I want to break down a few things. Across 4 games, he's had 1 catch each game that kind of made up his entire yardage. One game, he caught a 54-yard catch. Another game, he caught a 28-yard catch. Another game, he caught a 30-yard catch. After that, spread across 4 games, outside of those 3 catches, 11 for 68 yards, okay? And then outside of that, 2.75 he's averaging receptions for 17 yards after that. So after 1 catch in those games, across the board, he's averaging 2.75 receptions for 17 yards per game. Another thing I want to talk about is his air yards. 399 air yards, as we know, is one of the highest in the league, but only 27 yards after catch, okay? And so I want to go back to you on this because he has no touchdowns. I don't know. I think he has 1 red zone target. And I want to ask you, is this still as valuable as an upside player? And here's the thing. The Falcons are ranked 7th against pass yardage per game, right? Not saying that they have a great pass D. I'm just saying that they're limiting the amount of yards per game in the passing game for opposing offenses. But is Will Fuller a better play than, let's say, Calvin Ridley in this game? Let's say Hollywood Brown. I want you just to help me understand, so that way maybe there's something I'm not looking at that makes me feel more intrigued of rostering Fuller compared to maybe these other playmakers.
Yeah, so I think Ridley. So I would take Will Fuller just due to price and the matchup over probably Hollywood Brown. But I think Ridley's very close. I actually right now I'm having equal exposures to both. So my thing with Will Fuller is the price point's still very cheap. I do think the air yards add up in terms of just showing the potential. But if you take away or if you add in, I guess the 75-yard touchdown where he was just wide open last week, a 60-yard would probably ends up being a touchdown week 2 that's overthrown. You give him one of those, his price point's definitely in the fives this week. If you give him the 75-yard touchdown last week, it's in the fives, and he's twice as high owned if he stays at this $4,500 tag. So it's just a beneficial spot because we know the big play upside. He has been playing well. It's just really his quarterback play, if anything, some of that due to the poor line or offensive line play. But for Fuller, it's really, if he was 5,500, yeah, not as much interest, probably more interest in Ridley, equal interest in Brown. But when his price tag is that low, I'm just still going to have interest. And it just gets exemplified a little bit more because he's the exact type of player I want in GPPs in terms of I know I need a big play. And now he's going to have, in terms of his just 40 speed, a good matchup. And he fits into a lot of team and game stacks. So a lot of my exposure comes from he's just a cheap piece that's going to fit into these game stacks and these team stacks for Houston for me. So he's probably a similar play for me to Calvin Ridley because I do like that matchup. And will probably be ending up getting more exposure to him than Brown. But that's, I would guess, because he's going to be in more team and game stacks than Brown would be.
So I agree with you on Julio and Hopkins. I think they're the best plays in this game. I also think Deshaun Watson is for sure in play. What about Matt Ryan? Because he's got the 300-yard point bonus every single game, okay? 46 attempts, 43 attempts, 53 attempts, 34 attempts, over 300 yards every game. Outside of week 4 against Tennessee, he had no touchdowns. But outside of that, almost 3 touchdowns per game each game. At 5,900 on DraftKings, could we go this route? And that's my first question as far as the quarterback is concerned.
Yeah, Matt Ryan right now ranks as my number 1 quarterback. He slowly came up pretty much every single day. He's like number 3 when I did the show with Lofty on Thursday. But I just like this team stack in this environment so much. I do like the matchup for him against the Texans, who are dealing with injuries in their secondary. Their safeties will probably still end up playing, but they're playing through injuries right now, questionable for Sunday. But I do like the matchup. When they've played good quarterbacks, quality quarterbacks like Breeze and Rivers, they've gotten torched, and they've kind of made their secondary look a little bit better when they played Kyle Allen and Gardner Minshew. So I like the matchup. Like you said, he's second in the league behind Mahomes in passing yards. And I think there's some big upside here against a team that finally, they've been doing all this work, not getting in the red zone or not scoring in the red zone like usual for 2-3 years now without Shanahan there in Atlanta. But they've been doing a lot of this work through the middle of the field because they've had zone defenses the last 2 weeks with Austin Hooper, with Mohamed Sanu. Now they don't get a zone defense, and I imagine Calvin Ridley gets a lot more open and just more room to work. And the same thing for Julio, which we know when that happens, it's just a ceiling game in the making more times than not. So, yeah, I do like Matt Ryan here, and the price tag just makes it even better.
Julio Jones and Hopkins, right now I'm trying to pull it up real quick, for DraftKings. They're not in the top. They're not that high owned compared to what we originally thought, except Hopkins. Excuse me, I overlooked him. 19.2% for him. And then a little bit down, 17%. Do you feel like that's appropriate? Did you feel like maybe this should be more considering the over-under, or do you feel kind of it should be stabilized compared to the field as far as being spread out?
Yeah, I think it makes sense just because of the top-end running backs. People are jamming 2 of them into their lineups, and they're going to play Auden Tate. So it's okay to do that, but you're gelling yourself into a very similar lineup as a lot of other people, and it's leaving those guys probably a little bit lower owned than they should be come this week. But I think the ownership's fine. And I personally am probably just going to get a little different and play those 2 guys combined a little bit more, which gives me more exposure to them and less to those top-end running backs in 2 lineups or 2 in 1 lineup.
I think one more guy I want to talk about real quick that maybe is being overlooked, or, maybe considering the defense of the Texans against tight ends, but Austin Hooper, 4,500. Let's look at this. 9 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets, 11 targets, 9 receptions, 4 receptions, 6 receptions, 9 receptions. He's got over 15 fantasy points and over 20 fantasy points twice out of 4 games. It seems as if that this is a connection that is just really being overlooked with him and with Ryan. Are you okay with stacking if you, let's say, Ryan, Jones, and Hooper? I think Hooper at 4,500 with the amount of opportunities and what he's seen, I think it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, I like the price point. There's another tight end that we'll probably get to in a second that I like more than him in the same range. But yeah, he's kind of game flow independent now. I think he has benefited a couple times this year from just playing zone defenses, which lets you throw to the tight end. But there's no question every single year in the league, he's just taken a step forward. So he's definitely in play in stacks. I prefer the Julio Ridley stacks just because I think on the outside, not facing his zone, they have more upside. But Hooper's definitely going to be in some of those exposures. He's definitely a guy who's going to be in game stacks when it comes to fantasy cruncher for me.
All right. Well, I know who you were going to refer to as far as the next tight end. Is it Jimmy Graham?
Oh, yeah, it's Jimmy Graham.
All right. Well, before we get into Jimmy Graham into these 4 o'clock games, just want to remind you, use the sign-up code NFL Strategy. You get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus. Listen, if you don't have access to the premium articles, to Fantasy Cruncher, to Awesemo's Top Stack tool, Top Stack Team tool, where he breaks down all the stacks and upside with stacking either 1 and 2 players or 1 and 3 players from the same team. A lot of great things that come from using Awesemo Plus. Get 50% off your first month. Try it out. NFL Strategy is the code. If you need to know how to do it, just go to awesemo.com/join. Check out the new landing page with videos. They describe each package. They break down everything before you buy it so you actually know what you're getting. And just use all the tools that are developed and used from the man himself, the number 1 ranked player in the world, Awesemo. All right, 4 o'clock games. We're here. Dallas, Green Bay, Jimmy Graham. Great value. I mean, as we know, Adams is not playing. Talk to us. Is Jimmy Graham the best play at tight end this week going into Dallas?
So I still like Zach Ertz. I'm going to try and get to Evan Ingram over him. But when it comes to the cheaper guys, yeah, I'm getting a lot of Jimmy Graham. Probably too much right now. But last week was inflated because they threw so many times. But he did run 60 routes. He saw 4 red zone targets. Majority, if not, I think all of those actually, once Adams left in the 4th quarter, halfway through. So he's just the most trusted target right now for Aaron Rodgers. Sure, I think they scheme Aaron Jones into the receiving game a little more, or at least they should. But moving the ball and getting first downs is going to be rough. I mean, you're going to have Jake Kumerow, a guy who's ran 12 routes this year. He's just been a preseason star for the most part, not done much in his NFL career. 2 young guys in Darius Shepard and Alan Lazard on the team. And then you have pretty much just MVS and John Allison. Allison having his worst season short so far, and MVS who's not really a chain mover. So Jimmy Graham was just locked on Aaron Rodgers' eyes last week in the red zone and moving down the field on those last 2 drives, mainly the last one where they had to go all the way down the field. So I like Graham at the price point. I do think he's going to see targets. And for a tight end at that price range, if you get 6 targets out of the guy, it's beneficial. And we've seen the red zone work for him so far this year. I like the spot overall. I think he's the most trusted target of Rodgers. And that's a pretty big thing, at least when it comes to Aaron Rodgers, in terms of he'll zone in on a guy and throw it to him 15 times. I don't think that happens for a tight end than Graham, but you're going to get a lot more routes for Jimmy Graham out wide, especially in the red zone, than most weeks with no Devontae this week.
Let's talk about Prescott, Zeke. This Packers front line that got destroyed. Is it okay to say by Jordan Howard, giving up 3 touchdowns to him? Is Zeke in a good spot, even though we're going to be seeing someone out, in Smith from the offensive line? We haven't seen Zeke essentially do what we want yet. And as far as, and what I mean by that is just getting those big point games. He's doing his job, but I'm talking about that next level Zeke. Let's talk about this Cowboys offense against this Packers D. Over-under is 47, so they're expecting a little bit of offense here. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, this game's interesting for me because, look, Michael Gallup's supposed to be back now, and they're saying he said the doctor said his knee's completely healthy. It's just mental, but he still hasn't been able to mentally sprint on the leg. So I don't really know what that means, but maybe game time adrenaline, he'll be fine. So the offense actually, it should go straight through Zeke, if I had to guess. You have Jair Alexander, number 2 cornerback in Pro Football Focus, on Amari Cooper. Sure, Amari's great, especially as a favorite at home in his career with Dallas' short career, but he's been great in that situation. But really tough matchup. Kevin King on the outside, or actually Kevin King's coming in doubtful. If he's out, that's a beneficial matchup for Gallup, but how healthy is he? And in the slot, Tramon Williams, the guy who I ragged on earlier in the year, has performed really well now, 2 straight games. He'll get Randall Cobb. So the passing game and what this secondary or this team is built on is their secondary. The run defense is what it's not built on. And we saw that now 2 weeks. Dalvin Cook exploded on them. We saw last week Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders doing it. So there's an issue here. And Tyron Smith being out, yeah, definitely a concern, but he's a bigger concern for Dak in this passing game. With Tyron Smith out in years past, and really 2 years ago when he was out and Zeke was out, you had 10% more pressure rate for or against Dallas. So the running game is not going to be as much impacted as the passing game, which I think it just incentivizes to run the ball more. Not only that, keeping Aaron Rodgers off the field, as cliche as it sounds, incentivizes you more to run as well. So After seeing 97% of the snaps last week, getting involved in the receiving game, I believe 6 receptions. Yeah, Zeke is my main and I would say only priority from this game. And right now he's coming in as my second most owned running back.
I want to talk to you about some news that we got. I think it was yesterday, but Jamal Williams is out. Does this increase the stock of Aaron Jones? And can we utilize him as far as rostering him in GBP tournaments?
Yeah, it definitely increases it. So there's a couple things here. If you're a believer that he'll get schemed into the receiving game more, like we saw last week, albeit inflated with 50-plus attempts for Rodgers, then yeah, he's a great play at that price point. If he's not, and he's in his normal receiving 3 targets a game type of role, well, then I don't like the play at all because Dallas's run defense has actually been really, really stingent. Their secondary is the place you attack with 2 safeties. There's 2 starting safeties now injured. Xavier Woods not coming back for a few more weeks as well. So it's pretty much, if you believe that he'll see another 6, 7 targets, I think the best thing to do with no Adams is scheme him in, more design screens, whatever it might be, put him in the slot like a little bit they saw last week. But he'll see a ton of the workload, all the red zone carries. Dexter Williams, the rookie behind him, not much faith in him was shown in the preseason in terms of some coach speak around how much he knew the playbook and how prepared he was. So for me, I'm right now on the fence about it. I'm not getting to a lot of Aaron Jones because I think he should be schemed in, but I don't know if they actually do that. So I'm kind of pulling back a little bit because this Dallas defense has given up less than 60 rushing yards a game over the last 3 weeks.
Aaron Jones has increased now to 14.5% ownership in the latest Awesemo ownership on DraftKings. And for FanDuel, he's at 11.5%. Both cheap plays on both respective sites. But it's like you said, what does the game plan look like? And do they just continue to maybe throw it more? Or does Aaron Jones get, those carries that he's been splitting 50-50 with Jamal Williams? But I guess maybe what we can say is if they do get to the goal line, I think it's pretty apparent that he will get those goal line rushes. Outside of that, are there anything else that we could take from this game?
MVS gets a bump. He's going to have a nice matchup in terms of there's going to be injured safeties deep, but he sees a bump of probably around 8 to 10 targets instead of usually 6, 7 targets. And then Jake Coomer will be playing a lot, but I don't have interest there. So it's just Zeke for me, and then a lot of Jimmy Graham right now.
All right, and we're going to go into the last game, guys. And you guys, for all of you in chat, thank you for supporting us. Thank you for being here. Write any questions you have so we can go ahead and answer them right after we break down this last final game. But don't forget, give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, so that way when all these shows start, you get notified. You don't have to miss it. But we definitely appreciate what you guys are doing and appreciating the support and appreciating your insight. We're going into this final game real quick. Broncos, Chargers, 44.5 over-under, 6-point favorite from the Chargers. Break it down, Sal. Do we play anyone? Is Eckler still in play? Melvin Gordon's back. I don't necessarily buy it. 7,200 on FanDuel. I kind of really like Eckler. Would love to see what you have to say real quick about this guy.
Yeah, so on the Chargers side, Eckler, it seems like Gordon's going to be capped. So what you get there is just a really price discount on Eckler against a team that is probably going to have a very banged up and nowhere near 100% healthy Derek Wolfe on the defensive line. When he was out last week, we saw what Fournette did. No Bradley Chubb. This team overall is hurt in the secondary. So the defense is banged up. I do think Eckler's a fine play. Probably not in cash, but more so GPP. I'm intrigued by it, and I'm going to try and get to more of it because I don't believe Gordon's going to come out. And after everything we've said, I don't know if it makes the most sense, and what the coaches have said at least, that you're going to see a lot of touches for Gordon. So coach speak sometimes bites you in the butt, but it makes sense this week. So I think that's a really good price tag on Eckler, and my interest as of yesterday has come up a lot. The rest of the team for the Chargers, you're still going to have no Hunter Henry. Dontrell Inman's not going to play. So banged up. Mike Williams says he's going to play. Keenan Allen, it's just a matter of do you believe Chris Harris follows him? I still have way more interest in Hopkins and Julio from that game. Just for stacking purposes, I get to them more. Keenan Allen against Chris Harris Jr., he hasn't gone a ton into the slot to guard guys. He has done it against Allen Robinson a little bit, against Devontae Adams a little bit, but he's not going there a ton, like a few snaps a game. So if that's the case, and Keenan Allen running half or 2/3 of his routes out of the slot right now, if you don't think Chris Harris follows him, then it's a really good matchup and he's too cheap. If you think he follows him, I really don't want any when you have those guys above him. So I don't know what they're going to do. I really don't right now. I'm going to just lean to not get there because it is a brutal matchup and there are other options in the wide receiver position at the top end. So, yeah, Eckler I like. Keenan Allen I'm not getting as much of. The Denver side of the ball, Cortland Sutton's going to get shadow coverage from Casey Hayward, I would imagine. Deshaun Hamilton in the slot is just going to get taken out by Desmond King. He's been just dominating slot cornerbacks this year. So then it leaves Emmanuel Sanders against an undrafted free agent who's struggled this year in Brandon Faison. So I do like Emmanuel Sanders at his price tag. I'm getting to some of him.
I want to say something about Eckler is that, with Gordon, how many carries do we really expect? Someone just said 10, 15 touches. Me personally, I feel like they're going to work him into the offense. I think maybe we'll see 7, 9 touches, maybe get a goal line touch. I'm not sure, but I don't necessarily think he'll be on the field 50% of the time this game back. I mean, he's still getting his feet up. He's still getting back into that game speed. But I don't know. It's a gamble, to be quite honest with you. And Allen's interesting. I know you mentioned Chris Harris, but any of the 4 cornerbacks for the Broncos defense has not given up a touchdown yet. Pretty interesting. So, I mean, each of these guys, it's a stingy pass defense. So Keenan Allen's great. Superstar. I can't say nothing bad about him. But as far as opportunity and upside in this game, a little bit of a different beast compared to, let's say, the last few matches that he's had in the passing game. But outside of that, that's pretty much it, you guys. Any questions in the chat? Jeremy Savage asked, what about Andy Dalton?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So I prefer Kyler Murray. He's more expensive, but in that game stack, Andy Dalton, I'm getting to a little bit. I like, obviously, Tate in that game, and then I like Tyler Boyd a lot. So it makes sense. I would definitely just recommend it in stacks. The line does concern me. The main reason I'm not going to get to it in cash is there is a chance that offensive line is as bad as we saw, and there's a decent chance in that primetime game this past week. And when that happens, you just saw no time for Andy Dalton, nothing in terms of Tyler Boyd having time to get routes and get open. So in cash, I'm off of it. But in tournaments, yeah, it's going to be a lower exposure because I think there's less upside in the overall offense. But it'll be a piece of it, especially in a pace-up spot.
Someone asked Golden Tate, is this a play?
Yeah, I actually like Golden Tate this week. I prefer Evan Ingram from the team, but if you want to say, and we don't know for sure, but if you want to say he goes into the slot, which has been where he's been his whole career, has had success in his career. Last 2 weeks, you've seen Daniel Jones targeting the slot. He might like Sterling Shepard, but it's more so where that guy is on the field getting open in the slot. So Golden Tate not coming off an injury, it's not like he should be limited at all. So I actually like him this week, and it's a good price tag for him.
Someone said that the Broncos defense has no defense. Is that true or false?
They're just banged up. I mean, yeah, it's pretty much Chris Harris and then Bradley. Like, look, their best pass rush, Bradley Chubb, goes down. Probably, like top 2 pass rush. Bradley Chubb goes down. Then you have Derek Wolfe, their best run stop, was out last week, going to be injured this week, playing injured. Kareem Jackson's been injured. They've had multiple safeties, Bryce Callahan injured. So it's just a banged up defense that is probably not going to get fully healthy for a couple of weeks, if not the whole year with no Chubb.
I'd rather attack the Broncos in the running game rather than the passing game, just in my opinion.
Yeah,
outside of that, any interest in Josh Allen this week? John Brown, probably a lot of people will be off him this week because of recency bias. Is this a play?
Yeah, there definitely will be. And there's always that upside. And John Brown's not just a big play receiver in terms of just burning people. He's running crisp routes in the short and intermediate pieces of the field. But just based on the matchup and other places I like, I won't get there. Maybe I'll try and sprinkle some more John Brown, but I'm not going to get to Josh Allen.
All right. Let's see. Keenan Allen, low owned. Deshaun Watson, Yahoo Cash. Is that a play?
Yes, definitely.
Do you like Matty Ice in cash?
Yes.
Golden Tate against Minnesota D. Sorry, I think we already asked that one.
Yeah.
And then other than that, someone said you never have to pair a quarterback with a receiver in cash. True or false?
You pair a quarterback, in cash, you don't have to correlate. So the reason you correlate is to jump more people if that game gets a ton of points in a tournament. You don't need that. It's probably more so not in your favor to do it in cash because if the quarterback stinks, then you have another piece in your lineup that's stinking. So you're just crashing your more conservative cash games.
And the last one, thoughts on Adam Thielen?
Yeah, so my interest has increased over the last 2 days or so, and it's a really good matchup, but I'm probably still going to be under the field, but under the field to matching the field on it. There's just other guys, even in the price range, that I like more. It is a really good matchup, and I do prefer Thielen to his teammate Diggs.
All right, guys. Well, other than that, we are less than 24 hours, or 24 hours away, actually, from Week 5 main slate starting. Once again, we appreciate every single one of you guys joining us, taking part, interacting, asking great questions, and showing us your insight as well. It's always a pleasure. Sal, thank you for joining us. If you guys don't know Sal or want to know where you can find more of him, Sal, tell the people where you can be found.
You can find me on Twitter at SalVetri DFS. You can find me here Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturdays at 11 a.m. Tuesday and Thursday with Lofty, here Saturday with Chris. And then I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Sal Vetri. Cover fantasy content over there as well.
All right, guys. And for me, you can find me on Twitter at Chris Randone. Once again, we wish you guys the best of luck this week. Make sure you play good players, have fun, enjoy the games. Other than that, for Awesemo.com, the Yahoo Daily Fantasy Show, we are out, guys. Have a great weekend.